Um, Nahumai Herimai, Tenekoto, Tenekoto, Tenekoto Katua. Warm greetings to everyone who is joining us here in New Zealand, but also from across the globe. It's very nice to look at our list of participants and see how diverse it is. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the lecture of Attila Tóth as part of our lecture series of Thinkers and Doers. For those that do not know me, my name is Bruno Marques, and I am the Program Director for the Landscape Architecture Program at Victoria University of Wellington. Our Thinkers and Doers lecture series aims at bringing together practitioners, scholars, students, and the wider community of landscape architecture and affiliated built environment disciplines to share ideas and to hear the latest innovations in the field. This is an initiative that started between the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects, our Wellington branch, and our landscape program at Victoria University. Our ninth speaker, Attila Tóth, is a landscape architect based in Slovakia with a research focus on green infrastructure planning and design at urban and rural levels. He studied in Slovakia and Austria, did research on urban green infrastructure planning in Germany and Austria, and conducted 2 scientific missions to New Zealand. He is an assistant professor of landscape architecture at the Slovak University of Agriculture in Nitra. He is also the chair of the Lunotre Institute and the chair of the IFLA Europe Working Group on Green Infrastructure. He also has been awarded the Green Talents Award and 2 of the European Council of Landscape Architecture Schools Awards, as well as the Slovak Science and Technology Award. So his lecture will be titled Green Infrastructure in Planning and Design, Urban European Cities, which looks at green infrastructure as one of the main environmental and landscape strategies of the European Union, which is currently also supported through the European Green Deal and the new European Union Biodiversity Strategy. As we all know, green infrastructure is an effective planning and design tool for landscape architects and urban designers to make our cities more sustainable and resilient in dealing with climate change mitigation, biodiversity enhancement, and food security. So the lecture will provide us a short historical overview to the origins of planning urban green systems, an overview of current EU policies in this field, and also show us innovative planning and design strategies and nature-based solutions of green infrastructure across Europe. Just very brief housekeeping rules. Do not forget that Attila will be sharing his screen, so keep this window open so you can actually see his slides. Also, please remain muted throughout the talk to minimize any background noise, and there will be plenty of time at the end for you to ask your questions, either verbally or you can write them in a chat box. So please join me in welcoming Attila all the way from Slovakia.
Oh, thank you, Bruno, for introducing me. Good evening to everyone from my perspective, and good morning to everyone at the other end of the world. It's a pleasure for me to be in New Zealand again, although virtually this time. And I've prepared my slides especially, I shall say, to non-Europeans. I will try to introduce the listeners to the concept of green infrastructure, mainly from the European perspective of planning and design. I've done a short excursus to history. Now I will start my slides. Maybe it takes some time, so just please let me know if you can see my slides now. Yes, and I'm now trying to put it to full screen. Do you see the full screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I've prepared today is a short excursus to the historical development of green infrastructure concepts, reaching all the way back to the 19th century and providing a short overview of 20th century approaches. And then I will show different examples of green infrastructure planning in cities and city regions across Europe, and also some good examples of green infrastructure design and implementation in different cities. Of course, if you will have any particular questions, we can discuss them at the discussion part in the end of the presentation. So what is green infrastructure? One might say it's an old wine in new bottle, as many authors do say. Green infrastructure is a conception which certainly is older than a couple of years, and it started already in the 19th century. Its development is well integrated and linked with industrialization, and it was, of course, not called green infrastructure at that time, but you will see some conceptions which follow more or less the same idea like green infrastructure has behind, but of course it has a different structure and different naming. So let me allow to start this historical excursus with this illustration by Cedric Price, an architect from the UK, explaining how European cities looked like. You can see the ancient city, which is much like a boiled egg. Next to it, there is the modern city of the 17th and 19th century, so mainly in the period of industrialization, which looks like a fried egg. This was the time when the city structures changed. The city walls, the protection walls have been removed, and the city started to grow outside the historical walls. Still, the ancient core of the city has remained, and modern cities of the late 19th and 20th or 21st century look much like a scrambled egg, because you are not you are not able to identify historic cores anymore, and this is the case of many rebuilt cities of the post-war period. The conception of greening cities reaches back to conceptions like La Ciudad Lineal, where you can see green strips and green lines along which streetscapes have been organized. And perhaps a little bit more well-known is the Garden Cities of Tomorrow concept by Ebenezer Howard, who was an urban planner active in the late 19th century, and who came up with the conception of Garden Cities of Tomorrow. This conception tried to link the qualities of the rural with the qualities of the urban, and the city model included allotments, for instance, or a grand green avenue and the central park. So the city was much linked with, so to say, rural areas, which we shall understand as green spaces and open spaces. There are also other forms of green infrastructure planning, and this is, for instance, the green rings and the green belts. You can see examples from Vienna on the left and from London on the right. This eccentric way of planning cities or modeling cities was quite popular in most of European metropolitan cities. For instance, Vienna had this green ring along it, which had a protection meaning before in the medieval times. And of course, in modern times, when this protection function was gone, then the concepts of what to do with this area arose, and this made the way for Ringstrasse, for the famous green ring, all along the historical city core to arise. London was similar. There was a plan of the green belts along London, and several green belts divided different urban strips of the city. Another example is the finger plan from Copenhagen, where you can see the example when nature enters the city and creates fingers or green veggies, like you can see here on this example. So green veggies were very popular in planning conceptions as well, if the geography of the city allowed this approach. Later on in the second half of the 20th century, It was the period of environmentalism and different environmental movements. And in this period, also the so-called ecological networks developed. For instance, also in Czechoslovakia, there was the landscape ecological planning or territorial system of ecological stability. And the ecological network conception was more or less international. It bases on different core areas and landscape corridors, but the significance of this approach is more in the ecology. Green infrastructure is a more modern, or let's say a more novel approach. This reaches back in some perspectives also to the garden city of tomorrow from the European area, but also from North American space. It reaches back to the Parkways and the Emerald Necklace by Frederick Law Olmsted. And you can see here an explanatory image of green infrastructure as a planning conception. A very important aspect of green infrastructure in today's understanding is the multifunctionality. So it's not only about ecology, but it has a very strong social dimension and a very strong economic dimension. We have a green infrastructure strategy at the EU level, which is linked with all other strategies and policies, for instance, also with the Common Agricultural Policy or the new EU Biodiversity Strategy, and more recently the so-called Green Deal, which is an economic concept based on green or environmental approaches to renew Europe as such in a rather sustainable and green way. And this conception is very well linked with more modern approaches like the nature-based solutions, which we shall understand as part of a wider image, which should be green infrastructure. And all these provide ecosystem services. So these three terms are very buzzwords today for the European Commission and also for national authorities. Now I will show you some examples of regional and urban landscapes where green infrastructure is integrated. At the European level, I must mention the European Green Belt. This is a very interesting project. As you might recall, after the Second World War, Europe was divided to East and West, and East and West was divided by the so-called Iron Curtain. After the end of the Cold War and the collapse of communism, this Iron Curtain gradually turned into a European Green Belt. Actually, this process started already during the Cold War, because this was a no-enter zone for many of the countries. And this was, of course, very favorable for the landscape and nature to reclaim areas. And now it is considered the backbone of the European green infrastructure, and it reaches from the Barents Sea all the way down to the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. If we go back to metropolitan scales and city region scales, the London example is very famous. You might recall my slide where I showed you the ring concept of London, or the belt concept of London, which was rethought and redeveloped more recently, and now it is called the Green Grid. So this understanding from the 19th or early 20th century about the green belts, where there was a distinct division between urban and rural, and between built up and non-built up nature. Now we understand much more the needs of creating grids and interconnecting all the green areas and linking them with the city as such. A good example is also the Regio Grün from Cologne in Germany, which was a concept trying to enrich the green system of the city of Cologne. And you can see the inner ring which is the historical ring of Cologne. And this was the medieval city fortification. Here you can see another green strip, which was another fortification of the larger city area. And now it is both green strips. And the third one, it reaches already to the rural background and the rural surroundings of the city, and tries to connect these with strips, diagonal strips, which connect each ring with each other. Now I will go through some of the projects to show not only the planning and the model level of green infrastructure as a concept, but also to show how green infrastructure or green and blue infrastructure are being implemented in selected projects all over Europe. One of my favorite examples is Parc Clichy Batignolles in Paris, in France. This was designed by Jacqueline Osti, and this used to be a railway some years ago, when they decided to redevelop the area, and they created a huge new urban park, and the whole railway station was gone, and now there is a big green urban park, and the houses and the residential areas in the surroundings of the park have been developed step by step. So the park was one of the first developments, and this is the example, or this is the case of also other projects which I'm going to show you. You can now see some examples from Parc Clichy Batignolles. Which is interesting in this project is that it collects rainwater from the rooftops of the surrounding residential buildings, and also from all hard surfaces which are not permeable to water. It connects it to channels, and these channels are all connected with this water surface, where you can see hygrophytes and hydrophytes in the water. So it's something like a big perennial garden just on water. And here you can see on the top left an example of how such a channel looks like with the hygrophytes planted in it. It's all a closed circle which circulates the water, and also adds some extra water if there is a necessity in the drought periods. This part, what you can see in the bottom left, this was developed later on, and also the buildings are newer, and also the park conception is newer than this original bigger part. You can see also the trees, that it is more grown area. And it is a very popular site for people living around to do sports, jogging, and different kinds of outdoor activities, or just enjoying the beauty of the perennial beds and the possibilities to sit down and enjoy the silence in the middle of the urban jungle. A nice example is also the Greenwich Peninsula Ecology Park in London, which is located in the district of Greenwich. And interesting is that they took the water from the River Thames, and they are using it to create a unique park and join it also with the nearby residential area. So instead of lawns, which you might normally have at residential estates like this one, you have water surfaces, and also reed and trees, and small areas for the wildlife to find some ecotopes to live in. And what is very important, and I think also very attractive element of this park, is that they are also educating the public, as you can see on the right, and show them what kind of plants and trees are planted in this ecological park, and what kind of animals do live here with them. And this is the part already in the ecological park, which is just next to the residential area. You can see, for instance, that all you need here is reed and wood, and you are just walking through the ecological park. You have the possibility to observe birds, which found a place to live in the ecological park, and you have also plenty of elements for insects, but also for people. And instead of a path system, a regular path system, you have, for instance, such wooden platforms and wooden walks on above the water surface, so you can enjoy the water in the residential area right where you live. A similar conception is also Sjöstad Hammarby in Stockholm, which is although different in scale. And you can see examples how water is brought into the residential area and combined with possibilities to walk in the reed and get close to the water or sit down close to the water. So this is very attractive for the urban citizens who can live just at the water. And of course, this development caused that also the price and the value of the residential areas and of the flats located in this residential area of the Sjöstad are very high and very good for the owners. You can see another example of Seestadt Aspern. This is a newer development in Vienna. This used to be formerly a small airport, a field or airfield. And what they started the development with was creating this water surface here and also joining it with the city through metro. So this was the very important step to start with joining the city with this district of Seestadt with the metro line, creating green open spaces with a water surface, and then they started to develop the housing estates all along. What they are doing still now, so this district is still growing and still changing in time. So what you can see here is different now already. This was a temporary installment for people to enjoy the waterfront. And here you can see the metro station on the top left. So you can arrive to the district without the necessity of having a car. This makes the district very popular, and you can of course use also the green and blue spaces which are located here. When we are talking about water, another important element in urban or another important aspect in urban landscapes is the stormwater management. A good example of this is the Parc from Brno in Czech Republic. It's called Parc pod Plachtami, and it used to be a typical settlement from the second half of the 20th century. This type of residential estates was built in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. This is the so-called social realism, and many people lived in such flats, or they originally moved from rural areas to urban areas, and they started to live in flats. And the centralized planning system in Czechoslovakia or other countries in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, they're following the approach of centralized planning, and there was normally, in terms of quantity, quite enough green spaces, but in terms of quality, their quality standards were not really high, and now they are being redeveloped. And in this case, in the park in Czech Republic, they started to collect all the water which ended originally in the sewage system. They collected it to a central water surface in the middle, and now it became element of the open space. Being in Europe, it's also important to talk about traffic. Sometimes traffic cuts cities from their landscapes and nature. A good example of this is the Rio Manzanares River in Madrid. There was approximately 6 kilometers of highway which cut the city of Madrid from its river Manzanares. There were several strips of heavy road, so people were not really able to get just close to the river and enjoy the riverfront. And the concept of Rio Manzanares developed by West 8, which is a famous Dutch office. I guess most of you will know it. They developed the conception of a new river park where they put the highway below the ground, all the 6 kilometers approximately, and they created a novel urban park on the top of it, which some critics called like a modern Baroque because of these ornamental shapes. But the truth is here that actually this project helped to reconnect the city with its river and to create attractive open spaces. You can see parts of the river and interesting examples of how the river is managed and how it is used to enhance the open space quality. In many cities, you have large and attractive open green spaces, and a very good example for this is the Rudolf-Bednar-Park in Vienna. I like to give this example especially because the first thing in the development was to start with the park. Now you have residential houses all along and around the park, but they started the development of a new district, which used to be also a railway station, a big railway station. They started this development with this urban park. There was an international competition, which was won by Hager, landscape architect from Switzerland. And they developed this concept of the Rudolf-Bednar-Park with a very strong linearity. And when the last houses around the park were built, the trees were already quite nicely grown, and the space was already very popular and used by the public. You can see some examples here. So these houses in the background were not there when the park was already built. And an interesting feature of the park is that they left or kept one of the poplar trees, which was there originally before the development started. You can still see in the background construction going on around the park. So the city district is growing and the park is already there for people to enjoy the green space. Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam is a good example of how to deal with large traffic infrastructure like an airport is in many cases. And they planted hundreds of birch trees in the airport area. And all of you who are traveling a lot and or used to be traveling a lot before the current situation, you know the situation that when you are at an airport, you quite often are not able to use open spaces. You are most of the time inside the airport building, but at Schiphol Airport you are allowed to go outside and enjoy the open green spaces and the water features. So this is also enhancing the quality of an infrastructure like an airport. And here you can see some of the birch trees which were planted. This was also designed by West 8. And you can see a good example also of how you can use spaces like road infrastructure, where you normally are not able to place anything very useful, but you can still use it as a park if you choose the right materials and the right trees to place there. I'm going back to the regional structure, to the regional green system of Cologne, which I showed already when I was talking about cityscape planning or about city region planning of green spaces. This is a very good example where you can see the two rings, the two green belts of Cologne. The one is the inner one. This is typical with historical parks, some of them reaching back to the 19th and 20th century. And this strip is more multifunctional with different sorts of parks of different kind. And an example which I want to highlight, there are two parks, both of them located in the outer ring of the city of Cologne. One of them is called the Landscape Park Belvedere, which is located here, and it is known as an agrarian or agricultural park. There was a competition called for this area to redevelop the site, because what you can see here is a highway on this side here on the left, and on the right you can see already some of the outskirts of the city of Cologne, which is mainly individual housing but also collective housing. And here there was some kind of leftover agricultural space, and you can imagine agricultural open spaces are under a very high pressure all over Europe, and especially in such big cities like Cologne. And of course there was a pressure to build up this area, but citizens of these housing estates and of this individual housing close to this agricultural area said, we want to have a park, we want to have an urban park for recreation and for leisure, we don't want to have any more development. So there was a competition, and it was won by Lorberg Stadtlandschaftsarchitektur, which is a name of the design studio which covers city landscapes. So he's focusing especially on city landscapes, and Lorberg is also a specialist in urban agriculture. So the winning concept, what they submitted, was that they combined agriculture with park. So agriculture did not have to end in this site on one hand, and a new park could arise and citizens could use this park. And how they made it? They created a unique area. As you can see here, agriculture is still ongoing in some 300 hectares. You can see these areas here. This is active agriculture. What they created is a good network for cyclists and pedestrians in the whole park, for people to do exercises or to just spend their leisure time. And they added also differently high and with a very nice architecture, such viewing towers like you can see here. And the different height of these viewing towers enables visitors to see different levels of the agricultural landscape. The one with wide views and overviewing the typical structure of arable lands, and the lowest one is really just a few centimeters about the arable land, so you can see the crops themselves. And this turned out to be very popular for people. They go cycling here with children, and also what they do is come to observe harvesting or seeding, so different periods of the agricultural year. And also very important part is this eco strips along the path systems, what you can see here. And there is also an information for all the visitors stating that your farmer does something for biodiversity and plants these green strips. Here you can see one of the viewing towers, the middle-sized one, where an observer can see the whole agricultural area and enjoy the view of the typical agricultural landscape in different parts of the year. Another example from Cologne is the so-called Forest Lab, Waldlabor. This was also a competition where the city wanted to do a new park, and the challenge was to develop something new, something novel. And then the Forest Lab conception came up. And in this forest lab or forest park, they are testing different types of green, fast-growing trees and fast-growing woody plants, which they gradually harvest. So the entire space of the forest is changing from time to time. And they are also testing the adaptability of different woody plant species to climate change, how they react and how fast they can grow, and how they react to drought periods and so on. So this is not just an open space, but it is also a living lab at the same time. And you can see here how the space looks like when the fast-growing trees, this is a salix, a willow, and it creates typical inner spaces. And here are some land art elements which were created by students in a workshop. So the site is very dynamic and very changeable, and people can enjoy this different type of open green space. And now I'm getting close to the end of my presentation, and I will go through some different types of green spaces, especially on roofs and walls or highways, and even a vertical park. We have many brownfields, especially in countries where industry was well developed. Here are some examples from Germany and from Italy. You know that the Ruhr area in northwest Germany was a very productive industrial area in the 19th and 20th century. And after the intensive production stopped, many new brownfields occurred. So the Emscher Landscape Park in North Rhine-Westphalia region of Germany is very rich in sites of this kind. You can see two examples here. This is the Zollverein Essen, and the other one is the Landschaftspark Nord, the Landscape Park North in Duisburg. Both used to be active factories till the 1980s, I think, and then they were redeveloped into new parks. And to make it more sustainable and also to keep the industrial heritage of the site, most of the structures and constructions have been kept, so you can still see them in the open space. And these parks and these concepts work a lot with designed succession, and they use ruderal vegetation or spontaneous vegetation and implement it in the concept of the park on a long run. And there is an example from Torino, from Italy, where in one picture you can see also a redeveloped brownfield, which is the whole area, combined also with green walls and green roofs of the administrative buildings of the park. Some more examples of green roofs. This example is from Czech Republic. This is a rooftop where you can also sit and enjoy the urban roof landscape. This example on the top left is also from a post-industrial Czech city of Ostrava, where they created this extensive rooftop. And this is one of the flagship views of this area, and very famous and popular. And of course, in many cases, roofs can be used also not just to be extensively green, but they can be also intensively used open spaces. This is an example from the University of Greenwich in UK. But you can think also about small-scale greening on garages. This example is from Germany, also from the Ruhr area. Many of the garages are greened on their roofs and also in many cases on the walls. But you can see also really tiny green roofs on stands for bicycles or on stands for garbage bins, where there are tiny green roofs created and green surrounded by green walls. But also you can find different types of green walls. I've selected examples from Madrid, Paris, and Vienna. This one is very famous in Madrid. This is an example of a very intensive green wall. This needs, of course, a lot of watering, but you have also rather more extensive options. This one is, for instance, from Vienna. This is a more extensive type of green wall, but also other types of vegetated walls occur where the sustainability, also in terms of economy and ecology, are more significant than the one here, which needs really a lot of care and maintenance. And of course, if we talk about large-scale infrastructure, we can give an example of ecoducts, where Austria, for instance, is really one of the flagship countries in this. In Europe, they have, compared to the size of the country, a well-developed network of highways, and you can see all along the highways such ecoducts which allow the wildlife to cross this barrier in the landscape. So this is a very important challenge also to many other countries where highways lack such ecoducts, and they become very significant barriers in the landscape for the connectivity of green infrastructure for wildlife especially. And I will end up this round of examples of different green infrastructure projects, which were ought to inspire especially students of landscape architecture about different possibilities, and perhaps give some references if you want to go more into depth in some of the projects. This is an example from Zurich, from Switzerland, which shows that parks do not have to be one-floor constructions. Even parks can have several floors, and they can be like a residential building. The MFO Park from Zurich is a good example for this, where in a relatively small scale, quite a significant park was created. You can see a constructed a construction where where plants are overgrowing the construction and creating a green wall system, and you can see several layers and several floors of the park. So the ground floor is used as a very intensive meeting point, and also for shortening ways in the everyday city landscape. So people can walk around and through the park, and this was very important to allow the use of this site. So therefore, there is not so much green space or green surfaces, but they are using permeable surfaces for the water to allow to enter the ground. And they are compensating in this project the green spaces which they could not afford to do on the ground floor, but they did it on the vertical structures and also on horizontal structures, especially on the rooftop. Here you can see some views from the several floors and stories of the park. So you can just come on the balcony of the park and enjoy the views in the space of the park. And here you can see a seating option with a small water feature. And what is interesting about this water feature, you can see in the bottom of this picture that instead of gravel, which it looks on the first view, on the first sight as a gravel, it is a recycled glass. You can see green and blue and white glass or brown glass. So it is also a very nice accent, a very nice color accent in the space. And at the same time, it gives a sort of a sustainability message, how we can smartly reuse some materials and use it for use it instead of gravel, for instance, in this case. And here you are on the rooftop of the park, on the top left picture. and you can enjoy the views in the surrounding city landscape of Zurich. And here a last view into the park space. And I'm going to end up with a picture from London, from a park, where it says, keep cities wild. And I can agree with the statement. Of course, we might discuss to what extent, in which way, keeping cities wild. But certainly today's approaches to city planning, to urban design and landscape architecture are working a lot with ecology and nature and not against it. So thank you for your attention, and I'm giving back the floor to Bruno.
Thank you, Attila. That was an excellent lecture, taking us across Europe and seeing all these very interesting projects and how they have addressed green infrastructure. So now it's time to open the floor for questions. As I said initially, you can either ask your question directly to Attila by unmuting yourself, or if you feel a little shy, you can always type it in the chat box, and we will read it. Giving you some time to prepare the questions, I will just kickstart by asking, because you have been here in New Zealand twice by now, hopefully more in the future. What was your initial reaction in terms of the strategies that you saw in New Zealand, and how much of those have actually enhanced the green infrastructure of our cities, of our urban environments? Was there anything that you felt particularly excited about?
Thank you for the question. Well, yes, I was twice in New Zealand. Once it was some 5 or 6 years ago in Christchurch in the South Island, and last year it was in Rotorua in North Island. And I was doing research in Christchurch on redeveloping the destroyed city after earthquakes, and focusing on the urban resilience and the foodscapes of the city of Christchurch. And last year we looked at forest landscapes in different parts of the North Island, but with a focus on Rotorua. So for me, my impression from New Zealand was that the landscape is completely different. So it's very exotic to a European to come to New Zealand. So what I was amazed from was the unique landscape and the unique nature you have. So I think this is the largest natural capital you have to keep in mind in planning and design. And on the other hand, I saw also that New Zealand is quite dependent on car traffic. So once you don't have a car, you are not really able to get from A to B. And this, of course, influences also planning to a very large extent from my perspective. So I think you can learn from some European examples, which I consider relevant also for New Zealand. And also very important is the agricultural landscape, because you can keep your cities resilient also in terms of food security. And I think there is a large tradition in most of the cities. And in the North Island, I think also urban forests have a very big importance for recreation, but also for keeping the city green.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions from our audience?
I think I have to look to the chat box somehow, because I only see my slides. Can I stop sharing now, Bruno?
Yeah,
or?
I think you can.
Okay. Good. There is something in the chat box.
If anyone would like to ask a question to Attila directly, do not forget to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Emma.
Hi. Oh, hello.
Hi.
Good morning, Bruno. You can hear
Morning.
me. Hi. Attila, my name's Emma McRae. I'm a landscape architect at Boffa School in Wellington, New Zealand. Not really a question, just more of a kind of observational commentary, I suppose, on your talk in the beginning. You were talking about cities with green belts. And I know in a lot of those areas around the world, particularly in London, there's pressure on those greenbelt areas with the need for housing development. And I just wondered whether, I suppose, the examples that you were showing were perhaps an example of how you could accommodate that development within the greenbelt without perhaps compromising on those open space values.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just
Well,
of course, observation.
yeah, especially in big cities like London and also other metropolitan cities, you have a very massive urban development and pressure on open spaces. So this is, from my point of view, very much the question of priorities and how the city approaches this topic. For instance, the city of Vienna developed the green and open space concept, which became a strategic part of the urban development plan. So this is a concept or a strategy which the city follows in its development, and also in other Austrian or German cities, the green space are among the top priorities of the city. So in each development, they try to identify the main elements of their green infrastructure, the backbone of the green infrastructure and of the whole grid, and try to keep this also if urban development happens, they try to place urban development in a way that the green belts and the green connections do not get disturbed. And you have different protection status. For this, you can use the national protection, but in many cases, cities do not have this power for everyday landscapes, which are not exceptional ecological areas, but they are important open spaces. And many of the cities and municipalities are using the possibility of protecting their open green spaces at the municipal level with their own legislation tools, which are the municipal tools. So I think city planning has a very important role in this, and also the administrative capacities of cities, which are supposed to give building permits, that they have clear ideas about how to keep the green share in a city district, and if it is necessary, how to keep open spaces in specific areas if they have a strategic importance for the city as such.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, you did. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Any other questions from our audience? I think probably the Europeans are starting to feel a little sleepy by now.
Well, it's 11 here. Hi, Ursula.
Hello. I would like, hello, Attila. It's nice to see you. We have the same time now, I think. I am in Poland and you're in Slovakia. Your lecture was very interesting. And I would like to ask you, because you are a specialist of the green infrastructure, and we can notice that the green infrastructure, it is not a brand new ideology, because in 70s, in 60s, it was also implemented in our cities, especially in Poland, I think in Slovakia, in Czech Republic also. And how could you describe the difference in approach to design between this approach in 70s and contemporary approach, because the first ideas of these green belts, of these fingers structure was born, we can say, in 60s, but now the approach is a little bit different. How could you describe it?
Well, as I mentioned in my lecture, the conception of citywide green space planning reaches back even to the 19th century, with the first attempts. If we take it from North American space, it is with the Emerald Necklace by Frederick Law Olmsted, for instance, but also the Garden Cities concept, and this came back every time, again and again, under a different name or a slightly different approach. And what you are mentioning in the 60s, 70s, this was a strong environmentalist movement and environmental justice in several countries. And it was particularly in Western Europe with these environmentalist approaches. In Eastern Europe, this came also under different titles. For instance, in Czechoslovakia, it was called the landscape ecological planning. And this approach was with a very strong ecological focus. So if we want to compare green infrastructure from now and from the 1960s or 70s, the focus in those concepts was pretty much ecology. Today, the focus is also not only ecology, but it has a pillar structure. So one of the pillars is ecology, but similarly or to the same extent important is also the economic pillar of the concept and also the social pillar of the concept. So if cities are developing green infrastructure strategies and concepts, they not only look at the ecological aspect, but also on how it can improve the social structure and the social diversification of a city on one hand, and also how it can help in the sustainable economic development of the city. And now when most of the cities are talking about the Green Deal, they also, and the new biodiversity strategy of EU, we are talking about greening cities. So there is the need to green the cities any further for the against climate change as a climate adaptation measure, and also to improve the social structure of the city. So I think this has changed from the 60s. That was also in the Eastern Bloc countries in that time, this very rigid planning approach with the exact numbers to be planned and to be kept in quantitative measures, while the qualitative criteria were not so important. And today we much more look at also the quality of the site and also at the accessibility and the availability of green spaces and their distribution in a city landscape.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think also that we have a lot barriers to bridge above because during these 90s and the first part of 21st century, a lot of barriers appeared in our cities. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. Attila, I think we're probably going to stay here. So I would like to thank you for joining us virtually to New Zealand, and also to have such a diverse audience. I could see many names, not only from Europe, but from across the entire globe. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. I think it was a very inspiring lecture. I'm sure we're all going to get inspired with some great ideas on how to bring green infrastructure to our work. So thank you very much on behalf of Victoria University and the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning or this evening, whatever you are. And I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks from now for our next speaker.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Well, if anyone wants to send me some further questions, because I see that some people are still typing questions, you can find me on ResearchGate or LinkedIn, and we can connect up there and discuss green infrastructure further.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.